Hi, welcome to Audiobook Academy. This is a self-paced audiobook. There's no need to keep an eye on things. Just pay attention. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This is a book summary of When Bad Things Happen to Good People, by Harold Kushner. This age-old conundrum has vexed humankind ever since. Is there a reason why good people are the victims of bad things? Many times, we've felt that we, or someone we care about, didn't deserve what life had to offer. In addition, how many times have you placed blame on someone or something other than yourself when you were going through difficult times? Loss and tragedy are inescapable facts of life. In the aftermath of an event, we often find ourselves flooded with questions and feelings. With a practical approach to dealing with the emotions and questions surrounding loss and grief, When Bad Things Happen to Good People is a valuable resource. Rabbi Harold S. Kushner's spiritual perspective is both straightforward and insightful. The fact that he's been there himself is what makes him such an empathetic ally to those who've been hurt. Progeria claimed the life of Rabbi Harold S. Kushner's son, who was only 14 when he passed away. Those with progeria, a rare genetic disorder that causes a child to rapidly age, typically die in their teens or early 20s. As a rabbi, Kushner is well versed in theology, but he was unable to comprehend the magnitude of the tragedy he witnessed. When confronted with a life-altering event, we all find ourselves asking the same existential questions. In the same way that many of us question our faith, he also doubted his own. Assuming God exists, how could he allow this to happen, even if he is at the very least fair and loving? What kind of God allows such anguish? Though he was deeply religious, Kushner became aware of the unfair distribution of pain in the world despite his faith. This suffering calls into question the existence of goodness and even God, as people attempt to reconcile tragedy with a belief in a deterministic universe. We'll briefly cover the inevitable nature of tragedy and loss in this summary. This book, which was published in 1981, explains why God allows bad things to happen to people. However, there is a lot more to it than that. There is a lot that we can learn from this book about the importance of comforting others in times of tragedy. It's brief, straightforward, and appropriate for people of any age or religious background. For those who are struggling to make sense of a world that can seem unfair, this information may be helpful. Tragedy, and our desire for order in the face of it. We tend to see tragedy as God's way of punishing us for something we've done wrong in order to maintain some sense of order in our lives. When he was comforting parents whose daughter had unexpectedly died, Rabbi Kushner became acutely aware of this. Previously, he recalls them saying that they hadn't fasted on Yom Kippur the year before. Much like many of us, they thought they were deserving of some sort of retribution for their actions. This belief is problematic because it has negative consequences. Guilt, blame, and anger toward God and ourselves are common responses to these consequences. One day we may come to understand God's purpose for our unjust suffering if we just wait long enough. There are times in our lives when we feel as though God is using this to teach us a lesson, or that there must be an ulterior motive. We assume that God causes pain, and then we must explain why this is the case. However, none of these answers is comforting or satisfying. A search for explanations and a desire for order are futile. As far as Kushner is concerned, all of these rationalizations only serve to compound the pain of loss. He argues that if God were to test everyone who suffers, he would be making mistakes too frequently. It's possible that no matter how hard we try, the world will never be as tidy as we'd like it to be. There is a possibility that we're asking the wrong questions. Rethinking the concept of suffering may be necessary. Maybe we're asking the wrong questions, and God isn't to blame for the bad things that happen? Expanding on this, the Book of Job does so. Book of Job is Bible's most poignant story of adversity. We're told the story of a man who, despite his piety, loses everything he holds dear, including his children, his fortune, and his health. Then, he has three options to consider. One is that God is all-powerful, omnipotent, and in control of all. Another possibility is that God is just and everyone gets what they deserve, and a final possibility is that he is a good person despite the circumstances. Kushner came to a single conclusion after analyzing the story. He makes the argument that we must alter our view of God. While God may be all-powerful and all-knowing, this does not mean he has complete control over our lives. Things happen at random all the time, and he can't protect the righteous from harm. Humans are wired to look for cause and effect, even when there is none. This is a difficult concept to grasp. If we believe that bad things don't happen to us because of the will of God, controlling our emotions becomes much simpler. We will be able to deal with our rage and grief without feeling like we're at odds with God if we do this. It becomes possible to call on the Lord for help and comfort instead of feeling judged by Him. Perspectives on chance. When a forest fire moves towards some homes, but not others. What is the reason behind it? Why does one person escape tragedy, while another succumbs to it, despite a minor shift in strategy? How many close calls have you had in your life? This book hinges on how we respond to the idea of reason and order. How about accepting the idea that there are a few rough edges to the universe rather than believing that everything is reasonable? In order to change our worldview, many of us believe that God is involved in every aspect of our lives. God created the world from chaos, so how have we been conditioned not to accept the randomness of the world around us? Kushner reminds us of this. In addition, natural laws do not make distinctions based on race or gender. There is no evidence that an earthquake is a work of divine intervention. Kushner is offended by the insurance industry's use of the term acts of God. If you don't believe that God has weekly goals, a list of good people, and a blacklist, you're wrong. He doesn't. Injuries happen to good people just as frequently as they do to bad ones. We may have to deal with a world that is unfolding without God's intervention. Fundamentally, however, the rabbi's insight is that when something terrible happens, God is just as enraged and saddened as we are. What a divine act that is! When a community responds and rebuilds after a tragedy, it shows the hand of God. Regardless of the event, how people support each other is the most important thing. It's time to rethink the way we view support. There will always be suffering, according to the rabbi. When people come to comfort us, they often add to our problems instead of alleviating them. Providing the right kind of support can be difficult, so what can we say that doesn't give the impression that the victim deserves what has happened to him? What can we do to help them feel less isolated? It is common for us to try to defend God or give answers that support our preconceived notions. A paralyzed friend of Kushner's was told, "It's God's way of teaching you a lesson. God took your mother because he needed her now more than you did," a teenager who had recently lost his mom to cancer was told by someone. And how many times have people been told to rejoice because someone they care about has gone to a happier place? They're meant to comfort, but instead they fuel their sense of shame and resentment toward the God who would subject them to such suffering. "How can this happen?" is a common refrain among those shaken by the news. Instead of a question mark, Rabbi Kushner recommends using an exclamation point. As soon as a question is asked, we are compelled to find an answer that is consistent with what we believe. In spite of this, he stresses that this is merely a hypothetical question and a sign of emotional distress. It's a plea for help that allows us to laud the virtues of the person in question. The idea is also to unite in opposition to the injustice and cruelty of it all, and share in their anguish and misery. The rabbi offers some helpful advice on what not to say when we're trying to help someone in need. Anything critical, such as "don't take it so hard," should be avoided. We should also avoid saying things like, "it could have been worse," in an effort to minimize the pain. Furthermore, we must refrain from saying things like, "she's better off now." Finally, it's best not to imply that we are unable to question the existence of God. There are a few key things we can do to show our support. Arrive with the guts to face the person directly and confront their grief. It's also critical to pay attention and keep your composure in the face of their grief and anguish. Solid support begins with being a silent presence and understanding the universal sense of guilt that people feel. In many cases, what people really need is a sympathetic ear and compassion, not advice. We tend to be apprehensive about anger, whether it's our own or that of someone else. Anger can be dealt with in a variety of ways, including by venting it on others, alienating them, or burying it within ourselves. As a result, we become enraged with God, making it impossible for him to comfort us. Rather than fearing or suppressing our anger, the rabbi says, we should learn to express it in a way that doesn't make it more difficult to get help. He makes it clear that we should direct our rage at the situation, which is an important point. Perspective is critical. What we need to do is shift our focus from "why did it happen?" to "what do I do now that it has occurred?" We have been given a moral choice in the course of our evolution. The Holocaust serves as a stark illustration of what can happen when people make bad decisions. He believes that God cannot influence our choices between good and evil, but that God is the source of our empathy and anger when injustice is committed. If we don't hold God accountable for the bad things that happen, we need to reevaluate the point of praying in the first place. Praying for a good outcome then makes no sense. That is, we're making the assumption that God has some sort of checklist for us to check off, or that we are deserving of his attention. And how can we not feel abandoned if our prayer is not answered? How can we not feel remorseful, angry, and hopeless if we've done nothing wrong? It's possible our interpretation is that we didn't pray hard enough, that God knows best, or that there's no God. The idea is to reevaluate why we pray in the first place. Prayer enables us to connect with others who are on a similar journey. It's good to be able to share good and bad times with others, and that's why religion is so important. It fosters a sense of belonging. There are two primary functions served by prayer. In the Jewish tradition of the meal of replenishment, the bereaved person does not take food for himself or serve anyone else after a funeral. Instead, he was fed by others, which symbolized the importance of a community coming together to fill a void of grief. When we pray, we are rescued from our loneliness and reminded that we're not alone. When we pray, we're not just connecting with one another, we're also connecting with God. When you're going through a tough time, it's not just about putting together a shopping list, it's also about asking God for help. Rather than causing the loss, God helps us find ways to cope with it. To sum it up, to paraphrase Rabbi Kushner, the dead depend on us for their redemption and immortality. That's why he wrote this book for him. We can allow them to serve as witnesses for God and for the existence of the human race. In the end, Rabbi Kushner discusses the meaning of life. In his book, he makes it clear that he is willing to give up everything for his son's sake, and that he has no other choice. Moving forward is all he can do, he has no choice but to accept whatever fate brings him. Life and death are neither good nor bad, our reactions to them determine their significance. It is possible to affirm life and discover our capacity to live fully or to lose the ability to experience happiness. When bad things happen, it's important to remember that life is more balanced in favor of the good than the bad. With the aid of context, we are able to appreciate both our gains and our setbacks. Tragedies, according to Rabbi Kushner, are the result of chance rather than divine intervention. He does, however, give us a sense of belonging and the ability to persevere in the face of adversity. It is his belief that our moral responses, our rage and resentment at injustice, as well as our compassion for others, are evidence of God's existence. When it comes to God's power, he believes that there is no limit to his love. As a result, when bad things happen, we must accept that there is no rhyme or reason to them and that the universe is inherently chaotic. In the face of adversity, we are defined by our ability to cope. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. See you in next audiobook.